He didn't whisper it, he didn't pull her aside. He stood in the middle of a crowded cafe on a Tuesday morning and he shouted it, "You cheated on me." And every single person in that room went silent. The barista stopped mid-pour. A woman near the window put her hand over her mouth. Someone's coffee cup hit the saucer too hard. And Elena didn't run, she didn't scream back. She just stood there, both hands pressed flat against her stomach, eyes full, chin up, because she was carrying a secret that would have changed everything. And he never gave her the chance to say it. 3 years later, that same man would walk into a boardroom expecting to meet an anonymous buyer who had purchased everything he owned. The doors would open. And the woman he had destroyed in front of strangers would be standing there, in a burgundy suit, at the head of his table, wearing the kind of quiet power that can only be built in silence, in suffering, in survival. This is the story of what happens when a man mistakes a good woman's gentleness for weakness and spends 3 years learning the difference. Hey, welcome back to Alcott Stories. I'm James, your storyteller, and if you're new here, hit subscribe right now. You found this channel for a reason. Before we begin, real quick, if you've ever loved someone completely and they treated that love like it meant nothing, this story is for you. Hit like, subscribe if you haven't, and drop one word in the comments describing how it feels when someone you trusted breaks that trust. Just one word. I read them all. Okay, get comfortable. Today's story is called "You Cheated on Me," and nothing is what it seems. Let's go. Some men don't realize what they're holding until their hands are already empty. Julian Mercer was that kind of man. He had everything. The penthouse, the empire, the private jets that cut through clouds like they owned the sky. He had a wife who loved him quietly, completely, the way deep water loves the shore. Not loudly, not desperately, just constantly, every single day. And he threw it all away on a lie someone else planted. That's the part that will haunt him forever. Elena remembered the exact way that Tuesday morning felt. It was October. The air had that particular bite to it, the kind that made you pull your coat a little tighter and feel grateful for warm things, warm kitchens, warm hands, warm love. She was 3 months pregnant and she hadn't told Julian yet, not because she was afraid, because she was excited. The real kind of excited, the kind that makes you plan and daydream and smile at nothing while you're washing dishes. She had spent 2 weeks planning how she would tell him. Candles, his favorite meal, a little card tucked under his coffee cup that said, "You're going to be a father." She had imagined his face 100 times. She never imagined the face he actually showed her. She was visiting her mother in Maryland for 3 days, just to bake, to talk, to sit in that small warm kitchen that smelled like brown butter and old gospel music playing low from the radio. Her mother, Dorothy, was the kind of woman who healed people just by being in the same room. Elena had grown up watching strangers leave that kitchen lighter than they came in. "You look like you're carrying sunshine inside you," Dorothy said, watching Elena stir batter with that private smile on her face. "Mama, I have news." Elena started. Her phone buzzed. It was a text from a colleague, Marcus Webb from Julian's company. She barely knew the man. The message said he had a surprise gift idea for Julian's upcoming birthday and needed her opinion. Could she meet him for coffee? Just 20 minutes. Elena almost said no. Almost. But she thought, Julian would love that someone is thinking of him like this. She thought it was sweet. She thought it was harmless. She had no idea it was a trap. Clara Donovan had been planning this for 11 weeks. She was the kind of beautiful that made rooms go quiet, all sharp cheekbones and cold pale eyes and a smile that never quite reached anywhere real. She had been Julian's mistress for 8 months, feeding on whatever scraps of time and attention he threw her way, and she had decided very calmly, very methodically, that Elena needed to disappear. She found Marcus Webb at a company party, a man with gambling debts and loose morals, and she made him an offer. Meet Elena. Sit across from her. Look like it means something. Let Clara handle the camera. Marcus didn't ask questions. Clara paid well. She positioned herself outside the cafe. She waited. And when Elena walked in, laughing at something on her phone, her long silky hair catching the October light, her dark skin warm and glowing, Clara felt something cold move through her chest. She took the photos anyway. Julian was in a board meeting when the message came through. He felt his phone vibrate in his breast pocket and ignored it twice. The third time, something made him look. A number he didn't recognize. 4 photos. And one line of text that sat in his chest like a blade. Your wife is with another man while you work yourself to death for her. He stared at the photos for a long time. Elena, sitting across a table from a man Julian didn't know. Leaning forward, she always leaned forward when she was interested in a conversation. It was one of the small things he had always loved about her. Laughing, touching her hair, looking comfortable and warm in a way that, through Clara's lens, looked like something it wasn't. His board members were still talking. Julian heard none of it. Something ancient and ugly rose up in him. He had always carried this deep, irrational fear of being made a fool, of being the man people laughed at behind his back. His father had been that man. He had sworn as a boy that he never would be. That fear had been dormant for years. Clara knew exactly how to wake it. He found her at the café. Elena looked up and saw him walking toward her, and her whole face opened. That beautiful, unguarded smile, the one that was only ever for him. She started to rise from her chair. She said his name like it was something she was glad to say. He didn't let her finish. You cheated on me. His voice was low and controlled, and somehow that made it worse. The whole café went quiet. Marcus had already slipped out the back. Clara had texted him the moment Julian's car turned onto the street. Elena froze. Julian, don't. He said it like a door slamming. I saw some photos. I saw everything. What photos, Julian? This is Marcus from your own company. He wanted to talk about your birthday. Stop lying to me. His voice cracked on that word, just slightly, and something wild moved behind his eyes. Stop standing there with that face and lying to me, Elena. People were watching. An older woman 2 tables over put her hand over her mouth. A waiter stood perfectly still near the counter. Elena's eyes filled, not from guilt, from the particular devastation of being accused of something you didn't do by the one person whose trust you thought was unshakable. I'm not lying, she whispered. Julian, please, let me explain, please. He reached into the inside pocket of his jacket. He had already called his lawyer that morning. That's how fast the fear had moved in him, how completely it had swallowed his reason. He placed the divorce papers on the café table between them. The sound they made was very small, but Elena felt it like something breaking open in her chest. She looked down at the papers, then up at him. She searched his face for the man she had married, the man who used to press his lips to her temple when she was sleeping, who called her in the middle of the day just to hear her voice, who once drove 40 minutes in the rain to bring her soup when she was sick. He wasn't there. Whatever Clara had put in his head had swallowed him whole. Julian, she said quietly one last time, I am carrying your child. He didn't hear her, or maybe he heard her and the fear was louder. She would never know which. He turned and walked out of the cafe, leaving the papers on the table, leaving Elena standing in the ruins of a Tuesday morning that had started with batter and gospel music and sunshine. She didn't call him. She sat in her car in the parking lot for a long time and pressed both hands flat against her stomach and breathed, in and out. Slow. Her mother had taught her that. When everything falls apart, Elena, you breathe first. Everything else comes after. She breathed. Then she made a decision. She would not chase him. She would not perform grief for an audience, or beg a man to believe what his own heart should have already known. If 3 years of marriage, 3 years of showing up, of loving him through his darkness, of building something real and warm in the cold architecture of his life, if none of that was enough for him to pause before destroying her, then she would not give him one more piece of herself to destroy. She would protect what mattered now. She touched her stomach again. I've got you, T, she thought. I've got you. What she didn't know, what she couldn't have known sitting in that parking lot, was that Julian wasn't finished. He went home that night and he called Clara, and Clara came. She walked into the home Julian and Elena had built together, wearing Elena's absence like a perfume. She walked through rooms that still held Elena's choices, the warm amber lighting, the soft cream curtains, the small framed photos on the hallway shelf. She walked past all of it without blinking. Julian poured whiskey and didn't speak for a long time. Then he did something that would define him for years. Not the act itself, not even the cruelty of it, but the intention Behind it, the cold, deliberate choice to wound someone who was already bleeding. He recorded a video in the room he had shared with his wife, with the woman who had engineered her destruction, and he sent it to Elena with a message that he typed slowly, deliberately, the way you do when you want every word to land. You deserve this. You were never anything more than a placeholder. She is the kind of beauty that matches my level. Don't contact me again. Dorothy was in the kitchen when Elena came through the back door. She took one look at her daughter's face and she didn't say a word. She just opened her arms. Elena walked into them and finally let herself come apart. Not the pretty kind of crying, the kind that comes from somewhere deep and voiceless. The kind that sounds like a person losing their footing on something they thought was solid ground. Dorothy held her and rocked her slightly, the way she had when Elena was small, and she said nothing for a long time because some pain doesn't need words. It just needs witness. When Elena finally went still, Dorothy pulled back and held her daughter's face in both hands. "What are you going to do?" she asked. Elena wiped her face with the back of her hand. She was quiet for a moment. Her eyes were swollen, but inside them something was settling, not hardening, not closing. Settling the way a person does when they make a decision they know they'll have to carry for a long time. "I'm going to have my babies," she said, "and I'm going to build something so solid that nothing like him can ever touch me again." Dorothy searched her face. "And the papers?" Elena looked at her mother for a long moment. Then she said, "Get me a pen." She signed them alone at her mother's kitchen table, with a gospel song playing low on the radio. She did not cry, she had already cried. Now there was just the pen moving across paper, and outside the kitchen window, October leaves falling, golden amber and deep burning red, letting go of the branches that had held them all season. Some things, she thought, have to fall before anything new can grow. She sealed the envelope. She slid it across the table. And then she pressed both hands to her stomach and felt impossibly a flutter, tiny, new, like the first note of a song she hadn't heard yet. She smiled, not for Julian, not for anyone watching, just for herself, and for the two small lives already choosing to exist inside her quiet, extraordinary strength. Outside, the autumn wind moved through the trees. The leaves fell, and somewhere across the city, in a penthouse that had never felt colder, Julian Mercer poured another glass of whiskey and sat in the silence of everything he had just chosen to destroy. He didn't know it yet, but autumn always comes before the longest winter, and his winter was just beginning. Winter doesn't announce itself, it just arrives one morning and everything that was alive and colorful is suddenly gone. And you're standing there in the cold, wondering how you didn't see it coming. That was Julian's winter. It didn't arrive with drama. It arrived quietly, the way consequences always do, one small thing after another, until the weight of all of it was sitting on his chest and he couldn't remember the last time he'd breathed easily. 3 years. That's how long it took for everything he thought he'd built to start showing its cracks. The first year after Elena left, Julian told himself he was fine. He said it to his assistant. He said it to his board members. He said it to his reflection every morning in the bathroom mirror of the penthouse that still smelled faintly, impossibly, of her perfume no matter how many times he had the cleaning service come through. He wasn't fine, he was functioning. There's a difference. Functioning means you show up, you make calls, you sign documents, you sit at the head of the table and look like a man who has everything under control. Julian was very good at functioning. He had learned it as a boy, in a house where feelings were something you kept below the surface or used against you. But functioning isn't living, and somewhere in the machinery of his days, things were beginning to slip. It started with the small decisions. Elena had always been the quiet intelligence behind Julian's loudness, not in ways the board ever saw, not in ways that showed up on any balance sheet. But she had a way of sitting across from him at the kitchen table on Sunday mornings, coffee in hand, and saying things like, "Julian, that shipping contract in Houston feels too rushed. What do you actually know about that partner?" Or, "The Lagos deal looks good on paper, but something about the numbers on page 12 doesn't sit right with me." He had always half listened, half because his ego filed her observations under sweet but not strategic, half because he was always certain he already knew best. Now there was no voice across the table, Just Clara, who smiled at everything he said. Clara, who never pushed back, never questioned, never sat with a spreadsheet at midnight because something on page 12 didn't feel right. Clara, who was beautiful in the way of expensive things, impressive to look at but not built for the long road. Without Elena's quiet compass, Julian began making choices the way a ship makes choices without a navigator. Fast, confident, wrong. The Houston contract collapsed 14 months after Elena left. Julian had rushed it, ignored 3 red flags his legal team raised, pushed the signing forward because he wanted the numbers on his Q3 report to look strong. The partner turned out to be leveraged beyond recovery. The deal unwound in a way that cost Julian's company $4.2 million and a partnership network he had spent 6 years building. He absorbed it, told himself it was a market correction, told Clara over dinner that it was just business, these things happen. He'd seen worse. Clara nodded and poured more wine. There was no one to tell him the truth. The second year was harder. His import-export company, Mercer Global, the thing he had built from a single shipping container and $20,000, borrowed from a man who believed in him before he believed in himself, began hemorrhaging quietly, not catastrophically. Just steadily, the way a slow leak drains something you thought was solid. His top operations manager resigned, then 2 of his senior logistics coordinators, people who had been with him for years. When his assistant gently mentioned that 3 of them had cited leadership culture as their reason for leaving, Julian dismissed it. People leave companies all the time, he said. We'll replace them. But replacing people isn't the same as keeping them. And the institutional knowledge that walked out with those 3 people, the relationships, the instincts, the quiet expertise, couldn't be replaced by posting a job listing. Clara, by the 2nd year, had taken on a role in the company. Head of Strategic Partnerships, a title Julian had created for her without consulting anyone. She was sharp in certain ways. She could read a room. She could charm a new client over dinner. She could make things look polished in the short term, but she had no loyalty to the company's health, only to her position within it, and slowly, imperceptibly, she was steering certain deals toward people who had been very good to her personally. Julian didn't see it. He was too busy managing the leak to notice who was holding the bucket. The 3rd year arrived like a verdict. By January of that year, Mercer Global was operating at 30% below its standard capacity. 2 major African shipping routes, the backbone of the company's revenue, had been lost to a competitor who had swooped in with better terms. Terms that Julian had been too distracted and too proud to match when he had the chance. His accountant, a quiet, precise man named Gerald, who had worked with Julian for 9 years, sat across from him one February morning with a manila folder and an expression that said everything before his mouth opened. Julian, Gerald said carefully, we have maybe 4 months before the company is insolvent. Julian stared at him. 4 months. Gerald opened the folder and turned it to face him. Numbers Julian had been avoiding, numbers that told a story he had refused to read. He sat there for a long time looking at them. Outside the office window, New York was grey and frozen, the kind of cold that gets into the bones, the kind of winter that makes you wonder if spring is actually real or just something you imagined. What are my options? Julian said finally. Gerald folded his hands. You sell, quickly and to the right buyer, before the value drops any further. There are interested parties, one in particular, an anonymous acquisition firm that reached out last week. They've done their due diligence already. They know the company's actual value beneath the losses. They're offering fair terms. Julian looked out the window. Mercer Global, his name on the building, his name on every shipping container, every invoice, every contract. The thing he had poured 15 years of his life into, that had defined him, that had been the proof he kept showing the world that he was worth something for sale. Set up the meeting, he said quietly. Clara found out that same evening. She came to the penthouse and Julian told her, and something shifted in her face. Just for a moment, just a flicker, before the mask came back up. Something that looked almost like calculation, like she was rapidly rearranging a plan in her head. It's the right move, she said smoothly. You'll rebuild, you always do. Julian looked at her across the kitchen. For the first time in 3 years, he really looked at her. Not the surface of her, not the beauty, the performance, the careful management of his moods, But underneath it, he saw something he didn't have a name for yet, just a coldness, a distance. Like looking through a window into an empty room. He looked away, he poured a drink and went to stand at the window and stared out at the frozen city, and felt, moving through him like groundwater, something he hadn't allowed himself to feel in 3 years. He thought about a Sunday morning, a small kitchen table, coffee, a woman with deep brown eyes and a red-lipped smile reading a spreadsheet at midnight because something on page 12 didn't feel right. He pushed it down. He was good at that. Meanwhile, 300 miles away in a warm house outside Philadelphia, 2 little girls were learning to run. Sarah ran first, bold and fast, laughing before she even got both feet under her, the way some people are just born brave. Sophie followed more carefully, watching her sister's feet, studying the technique, and then launching herself forward, with a concentrated little frown that broke into the widest grin the moment she realized she was doing it. Elena sat on the floor between them with her arms open wide and caught whichever one reached her first. That day it was Sophie, crashing into her mother's chest and grabbing 2 fistfuls of her shirt. "You did it, baby," Elena laughed, squeezing her. "You did it." Sarah immediately turned around and ran back to do it again. Dorothy watched from the doorway, tea in hand, and felt something move through her chest, equal parts pride and grief and fierce, blazing love. These girls had their mother's smile, gentle and warm and real. But their eyes, those striking pale blue eyes that seemed to look right through you, those belonged to someone else. Dorothy never said that out loud, neither did Elena. Some truths are protected not because they're shameful, but because the people who carry them are not ready to be used by them yet. Elena's company had been growing for 18 months. It had started small, impossibly small. A consulting contract here, a logistics referral there. Elena had spent 3 years of her marriage quietly absorbing everything Julian ever talked about over dinner about his industry. He had talked and she had listened in that deep way she had, filing, connecting, understanding. He had thought she was just being a supportive wife. She had actually been learning. Her company, which she had named Soleil Group, the French word for sun, because Dorothy had always told her that after the longest winter, the sun returns first to the ones who kept their faces toward the sky, had grown from 1 contract to 12, from 12 to 40, from a desk in her mother's spare bedroom to a proper office in Philadelphia with 11 employees, 3 of whom had contacted her asking to come aboard. One of them was a woman named Diane Foster. Diane was 61 years old, silver-haired, and had 30 years of experience in international shipping and trade. She had been passed over for a senior role at a competitor, the kind of thing that still happened to women like her in rooms full of men who confused loudness with vision. She had read about Soleil Group in a trade publication. Read about Elena, and she had driven to Philadelphia, walked into the office and said simply, "I think you're building something worth building. I want to help." Elena had looked at this woman, this steady, experienced, sharp-eyed woman, and felt something, recognized something. "Tell me what you know about Gulf shipping routes," Elena said. Diane sat down. 2 hours later, Elena offered her the role of Chief Operations Officer. Diane would later say, in an interview nobody expected to go viral, that the moment she walked into Soleil Group, she felt something she hadn't felt in an office in 15 years, like the work actually mattered. It was Diane who first flagged Mercer Global. She brought it to Elena's attention on a Thursday morning in March, set a folder on her desk and said without preamble, "This company is days from the edge, but the underlying infrastructure is solid, routes, relationships, container networks. The bones are good. Whoever made the decisions in the last 3 years just stopped paying attention." Elena looked at the folder. She didn't open it immediately. She sat very still for a moment, her hands flat on the desk. "Mercer Global," she said. "You know it?" Diane asked. A pause. "Small. Heavy. I know it," Elena said. She opened the folder. She read for a long time. Diane waited in the way of people who understand when silence needs to be respected. Finally, Elena looked up. Her face was composed, professional. But in her dark eyes something was moving, something complex and layered that she wasn't going to explain right now. "Draft an acquisition offer," she said. "Fair terms. Full valuation. You want me to put your name on it?" Elena thought for exactly 2 seconds. "No," she said quietly. Anonymous for now. Let the meeting tell me what I need to know. She drove home that evening in the early spring dark, and when she came through the door, Sarah ran to her immediately. "Mommy, mommy, mommy." And Elena dropped to her knees right there in the hallway and held both girls at once, her face pressed between their small warm heads, breathing them in. Dorothy appeared in the kitchen doorway. "Long day?" she asked. Elena looked up at her mother over the tops of her daughters' heads. "Mama," she said softly, "I think the winter is almost over." Dorothy looked at her daughter's face, calm, steady, purposeful, with something behind it that was neither anger nor forgiveness, but something rarer and more powerful than both. She smiled. "Then get some rest, baby," she said. "Spring always asks everything of you." And somewhere across the state, in a boardroom with his name on the wall, Julian Mercer stared at an unsigned acquisition offer and told himself that selling was just a strategy, that this wasn't an ending, that he was still in control. He had no idea who was coming through that door. He had no idea that winter was finally doing what winter always does, making way. There is a particular kind of morning that arrives after the longest winter, not loud, not dramatic, just quietly, impossibly different from every morning that came before it. The light sits differently. The air carries something new in it, something you can't name but your body recognizes before your mind does. Julian woke up on the morning of the meeting and stood at his penthouse window for a long time. The city below was just beginning to wake. That particular grey-blue light of early spring sitting over everything, not warm yet, not fully, but no longer the dead cold of February either. Something in between, something transitional. He had stood at this window 1,000 mornings and felt powerful. This morning he just felt tired, the kind of tired that sleep doesn't fix. The kind that comes from carrying something heavy for too long and finally, in a quiet moment, letting yourself notice the weight. He showered, he dressed. He chose his sharpest suit, charcoal grey, the one his tailor had made specifically for high-stakes meetings, and he stood before the mirror and did what he always did. He assembled the version of himself that the world expected. Straight back, steady eyes, the face that said, "I am in control of everything in this room." He was good at that face. He just wasn't sure he believed it anymore. Clara was still asleep when he left. He looked at her once from the bedroom doorway, her blonde hair spread across the pillow, one arm reaching across the empty side of the bed, her face in sleep somehow more honest than it ever was awake. Something about her stillness had always unsettled him in ways he couldn't articulate. He thought about something Diane had once said. Wait, no, not Diane. Elena had once said quietly over dinner that the truest version of a person shows up in 3 moments: when they think nobody is watching, when they have nothing to gain, and when someone they love needs them to be uncomfortable. He had nodded at the time and gone back to his food. He understood it now. He closed the bedroom door quietly and left. The boardroom at Mercer Global occupied the entire 32nd floor. Julian had designed it himself. All glass and steel and sharp angles, the kind of room that was built to communicate power before a single word was spoken. Floor-to-ceiling windows on 3 sides. The city spread out below like something he owned. A long obsidian table that reflected the faces of everyone sitting at it back at themselves. He had always loved this room. He sat at the head of the table at 8:45 and waited. His legal team was arranged to his left. Gerald, his accountant, sat 2 seats down, folder open, pen ready. 2 junior associates from his remaining staff sat quietly near the door, laptops open, trying to look like they weren't nervous. Everyone in this room knew what this meeting meant. This was the end of something. Gerald leaned toward him quietly. The acquisition team is in the elevator. Anonymous buyer, as I mentioned. Full representation. They've been thorough. Julian nodded once. He adjusted his cufflinks. He placed both hands flat on the table. He breathed. The elevator at the far end of the hallway chimed. He heard her before he saw her, not her voice. Just the sound of purposeful footsteps in the hallway. The kind that don't rush and don't hesitate. The kind that belong to someone who knows exactly where they're going and has already decided how the room will feel when they walk into it. The boardroom doors opened, and Julian Mercer's entire carefully constructed morning cracked straight down the middle. Elena walked in. She wore a deep burgundy suit, tailored, precise, powerful, and her hair was up in a way that showed the full grace of her face. Her dark skin was luminous under the boardroom lighting. Her deep brown eyes swept the room once, quickly, professionally, and landed on him. She didn't flinch. She didn't smile. She simply held his gaze for exactly 2 seconds. The way you look at something you have already made peace with. And then she moved to the opposite end of the table and set down her leather portfolio and pulled out her chair and sat. Behind her came Diane Fost, silver-haired, immovable, reading glasses already on, a stack of documents under one arm, and 2 members of Soleil Group's legal team, both women, both carrying the particular energy of people who have done their homework thoroughly and are not here to be impressed. Julian had not moved. Gerald glanced at him sighs. Julian became aware that his hands were no longer flat on the table. They were gripping the edge of it. He released it slowly. He straightened. He rebuilt the face, but something behind his eyes had already changed, and everyone in the room, everyone who was paying attention, could see it. Mr. Mercer, her voice was the same. That was the thing that hit him first. He had braced for something different, something harder or colder, and her voice was simply the same, measured, clear. Warm in its professionalism without being warm toward hymns. He stopped. He realized he didn't know her company name. He had signed the NDA without reading the acquisition firm's full documentation. Gerald had handled it. He had been too proud to ask. Chen Williams, she said, her maiden name, her mother's name. Elena Chen Williams, CEO of Soleil Group. A pause so brief it was almost not there. We've met. The 2 junior associates near the door looked at each other. Gerald very carefully did not react. Julian absorbed it. He nodded once. We have. And then the meeting began. She was extraordinary. That was the thing he was not prepared for, not the sight of her, not even the fact of her sitting at the other end of his table, but the quality of her, the precision. She knew his company's numbers better than he did. She walked through the acquisition terms with a clarity that made his legal team lean forward involuntarily. The way you lean toward something that is simply, undeniably excellent. Diane sat beside her and added depth to every point Elena made. 30 years of industry knowledge deployed with the efficiency of someone who had spent decades being underestimated and was done with patience for anything less than full attention. Julian's legal team asked questions. Elena answered them before they finished asking, not to perform, just because she had thought of every question already and had the answers ready. At one point, his senior attorney, a man named Patterson who had been in acquisition law for 22 years, made a small sound that was almost a laugh of admiration, quickly suppressed. Julian noticed everything. He was sitting 12 feet away from the woman he had destroyed and watching her conduct a business meeting with the kind of authority that made the room reorganize itself around her. And something was happening in his chest that he couldn't stop and couldn't name and absolutely could not show. He focused on the documents, on the numbers, on the practical reality of what was happening here. He was selling his company to Elena. They were 40 minutes into the meeting when the doors opened again. Not a knock, not an announcement from his assistant, just the soft click of the latch and then the doors swinging wide, and 2 small voices filling the boardroom with a sound it had never heard before in 15 years of existence. Mommy, the word hit Julian somewhere below the sternum. 2 little girls came running across the boardroom floor, their small shoes making quick light sounds on the polished surface, making straight for Elena with the absolute single-minded urgency that only very small children have, the kind of urgency that recognizes only one thing in any room and goes directly to it. Elena turned in her chair and caught them both, one arm around each, and the professional composure she had maintained for 42 minutes shifted into something else entirely, something softer and more real and more powerful than anything she had shown in the meeting. She pressed her lips to the top of one small head, then the other. "What are you doing here, babies?" she murmured. "Where's Grandma Dorothy?" Dorothy appeared in the doorway a moment later, slightly breathless, her coat still on. "I am so sorry, Elena." They saw the building from the car and Sarah just. She looked up then. Across the length of the boardroom, her eyes found Julian. The warmth in her face went very still. Julian wasn't looking at Dorothy, he was looking at the girls. Time did something strange. It didn't stop exactly, it just slowed, the way it does in the moments that matter. the moments that rearrange everything that comes before and after them. He looked at the two small faces turned toward their mother, the curve of their cheeks, the particular way they each held their shoulders, one bold and easy, one careful and considered, the small hands gripping Elena's jacket, and their eyes blue, not the common blue of chance, a very specific blue, pale at the center, deeper toward the edge, the kind of eyes that Julian had looked at in his own mirror every morning for 35 years, his eyes, in their faces. Something moved through him that had no English word for it, something that was grief and recognition, and a love so immediate and so enormous that it arrived like a physical blow. His hands gripped the edge of the table again. His breath left him in a way he couldn't control. Gerald glanced at him, looked away quickly. Patterson had gone very still. Elena was watching him, not with satisfaction, not with cruelty, just watching him with those steady dark eyes, letting him arrive at the truth at his own pace, the way you let someone find their footing on uneven ground. Julian's voice, when it came, was barely a sound. Elena, she waited. Are they? He stopped. Started again. His throat was doing something he couldn't manage. Are those their names? Are Sarah and Sophie? Elena said quietly, simply, they are 3 years old. The math arrived in him instantly. 3 years old. She had been 3 months pregnant when he had thrown divorce papers at her in a café, when he had called her a placeholder, when he had sent her something that no human being should ever send to someone they once claimed to love. She had been carrying his children. She had been carrying his children, and she had signed those papers alone at her mother's kitchen table, and she had raised them for 3 years, alone, building a company from nothing, without a single word to him. And they were here. They were real. They were his, and they were looking at their mother with those blue eyes, and they had no idea who he was. He was a stranger in the room, in his own boardroom. He was a stranger. Sarah looked at him first. Children have no filter for the things adults spend years learning to hide, and Sarah, bold, fast Sarah, who ran before she was ready and laughed before she landed, looked directly at Julian with those blue eyes and felt something she didn't have words for yet, something that made her press closer against her mother's side. Sophie didn't look at him at all. She buried her face in Elena's shoulder. Julian watched this. He watched his daughters move away from him. And something happened to him in that moment, something that all the financial collapse, all the failed contracts, all the empty whiskey glasses and sleepless nights had not been able to do. It broke him. Not the arrogant breaking of a man whose pride is wounded, the real kind, the deep kind, the kind that happens when a person finally fully understands the true size of what they destroyed. His eyes filled. He would not have believed it possible. Julian Mercer did not cry. He had not cried since he was 9 years old. He had decided at 9 that tears were something that happened to people who couldn't control their circumstances, and he had spent 26 years making sure he controlled everything. He could not control this. His eyes filled and the boardroom blurred, and he pressed his lips together and looked down at the table because he could not bear to be seen, and he could not stop it. Diane Foster watched him from her end of the table. She had heard the broad shape of Elena's history, enough to understand the weight of this room, the significance of this meeting. She was not a sentimental woman. She had lived 61 years and seen men like Julian Mercer cause damage like this before, and she had learned not to be moved quickly by tears from people who had been generous with cruelty. But she watched him now, and she saw something she had not expected, not performance, not strategy. Just a man sitting at the head of a table in the ruins of everything he'd built, looking at two small faces that carried his eyes, understanding, maybe for the first time in his life, that the most catastrophic thing he had ever lost had nothing to do with money. She said nothing. She made a small note in the margin of her document and said nothing. Elena waited until Julian had composed himself. She did not rush it. She did not look away or give him privacy or pretend she couldn't see it. She simply waited, with the patience of someone who had cried every version of cry there was in the last 3 years and was no longer afraid of tears in any form. When he finally looked up, his eyes were red and his jaw was set, and he looked like a man who had just walked through something and was standing on the other side of it, not knowing what country he was in. "I didn't know," he said. "I know you didn't," Elena said. "You didn't tell me." Something moved across her face. Not anger, something older and more considered than anger. "I tried to," she said quietly. "In the café you didn't hear me." The silence that followed that sentence was the loudest thing in the room. He had no answer for it. There was no answer for it. Dorothy stepped fully into the room then. She crossed to Elena and gathered both girls gently. "Come on, babies, let's go find some juice." She steered them toward the door without looking at Julian again. At the doorway she paused. She turned back just for a moment, and she looked at Julian Mercer with the eyes of a mother whose daughter had cried in her arms on a Tuesday in October, and again in the months that followed, and her look said everything that decency prevented her from saying out loud. Then she took her granddaughter's hands and walked out. The door closed softly. The boardroom was very quiet. Julian sat at the head of his table and looked at the woman at the other end of it, and understood, with a clarity that felt almost physical, that this was the reckoning, not a legal one, not a financial one, the real one, the one that had been building for 3 years in the silence he had chosen, and the life she had built in spite of him. "What do you want, Elena?" he said finally. His voice was different now. The authority was gone from it, just a man's voice, plain and exhausted and honest in a way that might have come too late. Elena looked at him for a long moment. Then she opened her portfolio and slid a single document across the obsidian table. It traveled the full length between them and stopped in front of his hands. He looked down. It was not the acquisition agreement, it was something else. 2 pages, clean type, his name at the top. "Read it," she said quietly. He read it. His expression changed as he read. Something moved through his face, confusion, then understanding, then something rawer than either. It was a contract not for the company, for him. Consultant position, Soleil Group, entry level. Responsibilities outlined in plain language: logistics coordination, supplier communication, administrative support. Reporting directly to Diane Foster, salary listed. It was less than his assistant currently made. At the bottom, in Elena's handwriting, one line: "Prove it." "Not to me, to them." Julian read that line 3 times. He looked up. Elena was watching him with those steady dark eyes, and her hands were folded on the table, and her face was completely composed, and she was the most powerful person in this room, and they both knew it, and she wasn't performing it. She was just being it, the way people are when they've earned something so thoroughly it has become simply who they are. "You'd trust me in your company," he said. "I don't trust you," she said plainly, "but I believe in second chance. Not for your sake." She paused, for theirs. Julian looked at the contract again. Outside, through the floor-to-ceiling glass, the city was fully awake now. The early spring light had shifted, warmer, cleaner. The grey-blue of the morning burned away by something brighter coming through. The first real light of the season. He picked up the pen Gerald had left on the table. His hand was not steady. He signed anyway. Spring arrived the way second chances do, quickly, without fanfare. Just one morning the air is different, and something inside you knows, this is it. This is the turning. Julian Mercer reported to Soleil Group on a Monday. No driver, no corner office, no assistant announcing his arrival. He took the train like everyone else, stood in the elevator like everyone else, and walked through glass doors that had another woman's name on them. He wore a plain navy suit. No cufflinks, small thing. But he noticed it. Diane Foster met him at reception. She looked him up and down once, not unkindly but thoroughly, the way experienced people assess whether someone is genuinely ready or just performing readiness. "You're 3 minutes early," she said. "I wasn't sure about parking," he said. "There's a garage 2 blocks east." She handed him a building ID, plain, no title underneath his name, just Julian Mercer, consultant. He looked at it for a moment, then he clipped it to his jacket and followed her inside. The work was humbling in ways he hadn't anticipated, not because it was difficult, though parts of it were, but because it was invisible, the kind of work that holds everything together without anyone noticing until it stops getting done. Supplier calls, logistics tracking, documentation that had to be precise and thorough and submitted on time without anyone applauding the effort. Julian had spent 15 years being the man people applauded. Now he was the man who made sure shipping manifests matched invoice numbers. The first week he made 4 errors. Diane corrected them without commentary, just a quiet red mark, and the document returned to his desk. The second week he made 2. The third week 1. He stayed late on Thursdays. Not to impress anyone, most of the office had cleared out by 7. Just because the work needed finishing and he was the one responsible for it, and somewhere in these 3 weeks something had shifted in him, something quiet and fundamental. He stopped thinking about what he used to be. He started thinking about what the work actually needed. He saw Elena in the hallways, professional, cordial, the precise warmth of someone who has chosen civility without pretending nothing happened. She never avoided him, but she never sought him either. She existed in that office as what she was, the CEO, the architect of everything around him, and he existed as what he had agreed to be. It was the most honest dynamic of his adult life. One Tuesday she stopped at his desk. He looked up. "Diane says your supplier documentation is cleaner this week," she said. "She told you that?" "She tells me everything relevant to the company." A pause. It was a genuine observation, not a compliment, not a test. "Just a fact." He nodded. "Thank you." She looked at him for a moment, that steady shing look she had, and then she said something he didn't expect. "Sarah asked about you." The pen in his hand went still. "She said there's a man at Mommy's work with eyes like hers." Elena's voice was even, but something underneath it was not. "I didn't tell her anything yet. I'm not ready. They're not ready." A breath. "But I wanted you to know." Julian looked at his desk, at the supplier document in front of him, at his plain building ID. "Thank you for telling me," he said quietly. Elena nodded once, and walked back to her office. Julian sat very still for a long time after that. Then he picked up his pen and went back to work. Clara came on a Wednesday. Nobody announced her. She simply appeared in the Soleil Group lobby like something the season had blown in. White coat, sharp eyes, that practiced smile arranged carefully on her face. The receptionist called up to Elena's assistant. Diane intercepted her before she reached the elevator. "Mems. Donovan." Diane's voice carried the particular authority of someone who has handled far more difficult situations than this. "You don't have an appointment." "I don't need one." Clara's smile didn't shift. "I'm here to see Julian. Mr. Mercer is working." Something flickered behind Clara's eyes. Mr. Mercer, the reduction of it. She hadn't expected that. "Then I'll wait," she said. "You won't," Diane said simply. "This is a place of work, not a personal address. If you have business with Soleil Group, submit a formal inquiry through our website. If you don't, I'll need to ask you to leave." Clara looked at her for a long moment, then her smile changed. "Not warmer." "Shapper, tell Elena," she said quietly, "that I have documents she might find interesting. About Julian, about the company he lost, about decisions that were made." A pause built deliberately. "Tell her I'm prepared to share them for the right conversation." Diane looked at her evenly. "I'll pass that along." Clara left. Diane went directly to Elena's office. Elena listened without interrupting. When Diane finished, she was quiet for a moment, her hands folded on her desk, her expression unreadable. "She's going to try to destabilize something," Diane said. "Yes. Do you know what documents she means?" Elena was quiet again. "Then, I have an idea." She stood, moved to her window. Outside, Philadelphia was green and bright, the trees fully open now, that particular vivid spring green that looks almost unreal after months of bare branches. "She's been holding something back," Elena said, "waiting for a moment when it would do the most damage." She turned. "She's realized Julian is here. She's realized she has less leverage than she thought. So she's going to try to blow up whatever progress has been made before it becomes something she can't reverse." Diane waited. "Let her come," Elena said. Diane looked at her carefully. "You're sure? Whatever she has, I'd rather know." Elena sat back down. Her voice was steady and quiet. "I've been afraid of that woman's shadow for 3 years. I'm done being afraid of things that are already behind me." Clara's documents arrived by messenger the following morning, a sealed envelope. Elena's name on the front in Clara's handwriting. Elena opened it alone. Inside, printed emails. A chain of correspondence between Clara and a man named Reeves, a business rival of Julian's who had been circling Mercer Global for years. The emails dated back 4 years, before the café, before the photos, before any of it. Elena read them slowly, then she read them again. Clara had been placed, not by accident, not by chemistry, not by any story about two people finding each other. She had been deliberately introduced into Julian's life by Reeves as a long-game strategy to destabilize Mercer Global from the inside. The jealousy plot, the photos, the setup at the cafe, the manufactured accusation, it had all been architected, not just by Clara acting alone out of desire. By design. Julian had not been weak. He had been targeted. That didn't excuse what he did with the weakness once it was triggered. Nothing excused the cafe. Nothing excused what he sent her that night. Nothing made those things smaller, but it added a layer she hadn't had before. She sat with that for a long time. She called Julian into her office that afternoon. He sat across from her desk, straight-backed, present, none of the defensive armoring of the boardroom 3 weeks ago. Just a man waiting to hear what needed to be said. She placed the emails on the desk between them. He read them. She watched his face move through several things: confusion, then the slow, cold recognition of a pattern becoming visible, then something that looked almost like a physical pain. The particular pain of understanding that your worst moment was engineered by someone who studied your weaknesses and planned around them. "Reeves," he said finally. His voice was flat. "Yes, she was never." He stopped. "No," Elena said quietly. "She wasn't." He set the papers down. He pressed 2 fingers against his forehead and was silent for a long moment. Then he looked up. "That doesn't change what I did," he said. Elena looked at him. "No," she agreed. "It doesn't. I had a choice," he said. "In that cafe. I had a choice, and I chose the worst version of myself." His voice was not performing. It was just plain and tired and honest. "I chose it again that night when He stopped, jaw tight. "There is no version of this where what I did to you was someone else's fault." Elena was quiet. "I know," she said. "I just want you to know that I know that," he said. "Not because it changes anything. Just because you deserve to hear me say it without any excuse attached to it." The office was very quiet. Outside the window, the spring light lay across everything, warm and unhurried. Elena looked at this man, this changed, humbled, still broken in places man, and felt something move through her that was not love, not yet, maybe not ever in the way it had been, but something real, something that recognized genuine transformation and refused to pretend it wasn't happening just to protect old pain. "I'm going to report those emails to the authorities," she said. "Reeves needs to answer for what he did." Julian nodded. "I'll cooperate with everything." A pause. "Julian." Her voice shifted. "Exactly. Just more direct. The way you speak when you're about to say something that costs you something. I'm going to introduce you to your daughters this weekend." He went very still. Not as their father, not yet. Just as someone Mommy works with who would like to know them. She held his gaze. "How it goes from there depends entirely on you. Not on me, not on time. On you," he nodded. He didn't trust his voice enough to speak. "One more thing," she said. He waited. "If you ever bring anything into their lives that they have to recover from," she didn't raise her voice, she didn't need to, "I will not give you a third chance. There are no third chances where they are concerned." "Understood," he said, and he meant it. She could see that he meant it. Saturday arrived soft and bright. Elena brought the girls to a small park near her house, the one with the old oak tree Sarah had claimed as her personal property since she first learned to run. Dorothy came too, settling onto a bench with her tea and her quiet watchfulness, the kind of presence that holds space without controlling it. Julian was already there when they arrived. He was sitting on a bench near the oak tree. Plain clothes, just jeans and a grey sweater. No performance. He looked nervous in a way he probably hadn't looked since childhood. His hands were clasped between his knees, and he was watching the gate. When he saw them, he stood. Sarah saw him and went still for just a moment, then looked up at Elena. "That's the man with eyes like mine," she said. "Yes," Elena said simply. "His name is Julian. He's very glad to meet you." Sarah considered this with the profound seriousness of a 3-year-old making a major decision. Then she walked toward him with that bold, ready stride of hers. She stopped 2 feet away and looked up at him. "Your eyes are the same as mine," she announced. Julian crouched down to her level. His voice was careful and gentle and slightly unsteady. "They are," he said. "I noticed that too." Sarah studied him for another long moment. Then she held out a small stone she'd been carrying in her pocket. Smooth and grey and completely ordinary, she held it out like it was something valuable. "You can have this," she said. "I found it." Julian took it with both hands. Sophie watched all of this from behind Elena's leg. Quiet, careful Sophie who studied everything before she moved. She watched her sister. She watched this man who had their mother's trust enough to be in this park on this morning. She watched him hold her sister's stone like it was the most important thing anyone had ever given him. Slowly, so slowly, she came out from behind Elena's leg. She walked to Julian. She didn't give him anything. She didn't say anything. She just stood close enough that her small shoulder touched his arm and looked at the stone in his hands, and that was all. Julian looked down at her, his eyes filled completely. One tear. He didn't wipe it. He let it fall. Dorothy watched from her bench and said nothing, and pressed her lips together and looked at the sky for a moment. Elena stood a few feet back and watched her daughters, and the man who had broken her, and the slow, tender, fragile beginning of something she couldn't name yet, and she felt it, not the closing of a wound. Wounds don't close like that. Like a switch, something better than that. Slower and more real, the healing. The lesson arrived not in a speech or a monologue. It arrived in the image of a powerful man on his knees in the grass of a small park, holding a plain grey stone with shaking hands, understanding finally, 3 years too late and just in time, that the greatest empire he had ever been given wasn't the one with his name on the building. It was the small, warm hands reaching for him. It was the woman who had built something extraordinary from the rubble he left her with, and had still chosen to believe that people could change. It was the mother who had protected her children's hearts, even when her own was broken. True power, Julian Mercer finally understood, is not about what you accumulate. It is about what you protect, who you show up for, what you choose when fear and ego are both screaming at you and you have to decide what kind of man you actually are. He had chosen wrong once. He would spend the rest of his life choosing differently. That evening, Elena sat on her porch as the sun went down. Dorothy brought her tea and sat beside her, and they were quiet together for a while, the way people are when words would only make something smaller. Finally, Dorothy said, "How do you feel?" Elena thought about it honestly. "Like someone who survived a very long winter," she said, "and came out knowing exactly what matters." Dorothy nodded slowly. "And Julian?" Elena looked at the last of the light moving through the trees. "He has a long road," she said, "but he's on it." A pause. "That's all any of us can do. Get on the road and stay on it." Dorothy reached over and took her daughter's hand. They sat together in the quiet spring evening, 2 women, 1 story, and all the warmth of everything that had been fought for and protected and finally allowed to bloom. The end. She didn't just rebuild her life. She rebuilt her worth and made him earn the right to witness it. If this story moved you, ask yourself, are you protecting what truly matters, or are you too busy guarding your ego to notice what your hands are already holding? A message for every heart that what until the end. The most expensive mistake a person can make is confusing status with value. Julian had buildings, contracts, power, and he was the poorest man in every room. Elena had pain, struggle, 2 babies and a borrowed desk, and she was the wealthiest person in every room she entered. Asterisk, because she never confused what she was worth with what she was going through. Neither should you. Autumn taught her to let go. Winter taught her to endure. Spring taught her that everything she needed, she had already grown inside herself. End of full story.